Evening, I'm Dan Wall.
And I'm Laura Lee. Thanks for joining us. There is a bill working its way through the Minnesota legislature aimed at getting lead out of ammunition statewide.
Duluth lawmakers part of the movement meant to improve people's health and the environment.
But it could also make one of Minnesota's fastest growing sports too expensive for the young people who compete. In
a Northern News Now special report, our Rob Coles breaks down the impact this policy change could have.
Trap shooting. It's a sport that's exploding in popularity among young people in Minnesota.
I've always just been super interested, and I like the idea of being able to shoot for myself.
High school senior Haley Thompson is a Hermantown trap shooting team co-captain.
And I've met some of my best friends shooting trap, and it's just been an all-over great experience for me.
But that experience has a steep price, almost $500 per season per student, and a proposed change in Minnesota law could make that even higher. Right now, the ammunition used in trap shooting contains lead, but some new legislation is aiming to change that, and that's got parents, coaches, and players worried it may make the sport less accessible. Bills introduced in both the state House and Senate seek to ban lead in ammunition, requiring trap shooters like Thompson and hunters to start using non-toxic materials like steel. Hermantown's trap coach Teresa Theobald says steel ammunition is substantially more expensive, and that means many students simply wouldn't be able to take part.
What we are worried about is my team going from 85 kids to 15.
Theobald says for many trap shooters, it's their only extracurricular activity.
Giving these kids an opportunity to belong somewhere in a sport, in school, I think is huge.
With 2 kids on the trap team, Matt McShane is concerned about the possibility of skyrocketing costs as well.
It's an unreasonable burden on families and kids, especially on the largest sport in the state of Minnesota.
At Fisherman's Corner in Duluth, owner Matt King says trap lead loads cost around $10 per box, but the steel...
So you're looking at more like $14 to $15 per box. So with 10 boxes in a case, you can figure $50 to $60 more per case, so it adds up.
He says some trap shooters may even need to get a new gun to accommodate the change.
Some people are shooting their old grandfather's 870 shotgun with a fixed barrel. If they go to steel, they're going to have to buy a new shotgun.
And the steel industry may not be in a position to create all that added ammunition, which could upend the growing sport.
If they were to have to go to that right away, this sport would be probably in a real big panic.
State Senator Jed McEwen, who represents the Duluth area, is a co-author of the Senate version of the bill. While the legislation didn't make it through committee in the current session, she says it's laying the groundwork for future change.
The legislation that we introduced this year is really to begin the conversation around how we get lead out of our ammunition.
McEwen was approached by the Minnesota division of the Isaac Walton League, a conservation group, to propose the legislation.
I think our chapter celebrated its centennial last year.
Craig Sturley serves as Conservation Issues Chair for the League. He's concerned about the health impact all that shooting could have on the sport's young participants.
We know that lead is a neurotoxin, a powerful neurotoxin.
Sturley says the lead exposure for students can happen in a few different ways.
They're breathing it in. There's lead in the shot pellets and dust in that shot pellet cartridge. And so when that goes out the barrel, there's this cloud of some of it's even vaporized.
Sturley, a lifelong hunter himself, says lead exposure can be especially harmful for people who are still growing.
When you're building bones, you're supposed to be putting calcium in your bones. But if they're exposed to lead, the lead goes into their bones instead of calcium.
A claim supported by the Minnesota Department of Health.
Lead can also be incorporated into bones and stored long term. And then later in life, it can be slowly released.
Dr. Stephanie Yendel with the Minnesota Department of Health says while you can't get lead exposure through touch, you could if you didn't wash your hands after handling your gun or ammunition.
There is no safe level of exposure to lead, and that there are certain activities that you can partake in that would be riskier than other activities.
As for breathing in the vaporized lead from multiple students shooting trap outside, more data may be needed to determine the exact risk. Language in the legislation may address some of the issues concerning so many people, including studying the safety of the sport. The legislation plans to appropriate funding for voluntary blood lead level testing for people who participated in trap. There's also plans for a voucher system to provide non-toxic ammunition to hunters and trap shooters at no cost, though the logistics are still to be determined.
I think that has yet to be determined, sort of the specificity of some of how that would work.
McEwen believes the cost of steel ammunition will come down once production catches up with demand if lead is phased out.
In the legislation is really a nod to the to the knowledge that it will take a little while for the market to adjust. But the market will adjust.
For Craig Sturley, the cost of this change is well worth it to promote the long-term safety for kids.
The overall cost of lead contamination, the cost of people getting sick from lead use, the healthcare costs are far greater than the small costs that would be to go from using lead to using non-toxic ammunition.
Meanwhile, Coach Theobald says she's not aware of any current or former Hermantown trap team shooters experiencing health issues connected to lead exposure, but she is aware of how much the sport means to them.
To take that away just due to a financial burden with no safety, problems, I think it's unfair.
And for students like Thompson, she's hoping the current generation of shooters will be able to keep their sights on the sport they love.
I really think that trap has helped me learn a lot about myself, and I think that if the cost were to get more than what it is now, it could be fairly difficult to be able to participate.
In Hermantown, Rob Coles, Northern News Now.
An interesting debate, Rob. Thank you. Now, Northland Republican lawmakers we talked to are opposed to the legislation, as well as DFL Senator Grant Hochschild.
Now, while this current version of the bill won't advance in St. Paul this year, Senator McEwen says she's hoping to hold informational sessions where interested parties on both sides can give input.